Today I'll be showing you the most powerful and accessible options for weapons and ammo at level 3 traders in the hardcore wipe, which are not that straightforward to get to, by the way, mainly around money spent. But when you do, you are rewarded with some decent and importantly more consistent options for certain calibers. So let's dive right in with Prapor 3. So the most powerful ammo that Prapor has, I actually haven't unlocked yet because I've been slouching on his tasks a little bit because I don't really need Epsilon and I have enough rep with him anyway to get to level 4. But it's this one, which is 762 PS, and this comes from Punisher Part 1. So you have to go to Shoreline, do the AKM stuff, kill the scavs, and then you get access to PS. And PS is very, very good because, as you can see here, it has 61 damage, which is high, and 35 penetration, which isn't half bad against class 4. Let's remember the rule of thumb that the 37 pen mark, so it usually goes up in increments of 7, each 10. So 37 pen is the 50-50 borderline, roughly, for penetrating through class 4 armor. So that goes for both helmets and armor themselves. So if you shoot somebody with something at 35 pen, yes, it's not going to go through immediately on the very first shot, but that chance rapidly increases as the armor damage comes through from the bullet, which this also does pretty well. And this combines with the 61 damage to do nice things like getting a headshot in one go if it does actually go through the helmet and that sort of thing. The accessibility of the guns is pretty good as well in this caliber over on Prapor, and although these are kind of expensive, I actually don't use any of these, and I use one of the builds from another trader, but we'll get onto that in a moment and I'll flag that when we do. It'll be over on Mechanic. Before that, let's just have a look through the other rest of the ammo that he has over here. So you've got 545 PS. This is sort of thought of as analogous to M855. The problem here is that you're not really finding the better 556 ammo in raid that much. You do find it sometimes, but nowhere near as much as things like BT, BP, BS for the 545 caliber. So this really diminishes the value of this quite significantly. Before you do Punisher Part 1, you can still access either of this, the T45M, which is 30 pen, which is fine, or US, which has vicious bullet drop, but at close ranges has 29 pence. It's about the same as T45 in terms of what it does. A little bit less damage, but you get minus recoil, so that kind of balances out. And the other stuff isn't really worth writing home about unless you're desperate to do test drive and you need to use 7U4 to put it into the SR2M. In terms of the weapons that he has, some of the other stuff outside of the 762 caliber, we have the SVT, which I think actually could well be worth it. I know it's expensive at 95k, but so is everything these days. And you can combine this with a Workbench 2 craft for LPS, and that gives you an above 40 pen ammo to be able to one-shot players wearing class 4 helmets, deal significant damage through class 4 armor. You can two-shot people basically with this against most of the armors that you're going to be facing, which is really powerful. And the fact that this is semi-automatic, it's kind of a budget way to use those higher power rounds and actually get those within the workbench without having to find them out in raid, for example. There are a few other options, but outside of this, I don't really use them all that much. The SVD, obviously, if you're doing Punisher 6, you'll need to go and buy that, but the others I tend not to use. So let's skip over next onto Skier and have a look at what he's got on level 3, which in terms of ammo is very limited. You only have this one, 300 Blackout BCP FMJ, which means you need to buy an MCX. Now, there are limited ways to get this. Obviously, they're usually over on Ref. That's one way you can get these things. But the second way is to use the lower from Skier. So he actually has a lower part, the smallest possible base component that you can get an EFT for this gun, which is this at 40k, and allows you to build your own gun afterwards. I actually forgot about the defensive Velociraptor. So that is another weapon that is technically in the game, but it's very, very bad, so nobody really uses it. So ignoring the one from Ref, we can go to Skier and we can go and grab his lower here. And you can actually go and build yourself a full gun using the MCX. Maybe I'll do a full video about this, but a lot of the parts are actually accessible at level 3 traders once you have Mechanic and Peacekeeper and that kind of thing. And that then allows you to use this 300 Blackout BCP FMJ, which stats wise, 60 damage and 30 pen. It's actually kind of inferior to 762 PS, which is a little bit of a shame. The only thing that I would point out here is that there is quite a big difference between those two platforms. The MCX shoots at 800 RPM, so it's much more analogous to something like an M4 than it is an AK with 600 or 650 RPM. And typically you'll find that the recoil is lower on these as well. So not only have you got faster fire rates, but you've also got lower recoil, which means that in a pure TTK battle, even though you've got lower pen or something, you do actually have more chances to headshot. You probably also go through armor slightly quicker too in a straight up fight. Other than the MCX then, does Skier have anything else to offer us? There's a couple of weapons. The RFB, 100k. I would probably just focus on doing the barter. We've talked about this millions of times. CPU fans to gas analyzers at Mechanic, gas analyzers to RFBs, you need 2 of them, and we'll get you an RFB for a really cheap price using the barters, which is good. Then we've got these 2 vectors. This one unlocks after Vitamins Part 2. This is the 9x19 version, and this one is important for doing gunsmiths. It's kind of hard to get the vector any other way. The other version that unlocks with Skier 3 without any quests is this one, which is the 45 Vector. I would argue is probably the better gun. The only issue with this is that the ammo is quite limited. So the ammo for both of these sort of depends on Peacekeeper, who we're going to look at in a moment, because the Vector, while it can work with PSD, you're probably better off firing AP 6.3 if you have the money for it. And the Vector technically would work best with AP, but you can't buy AP until level 4 traders. And so this gun really ends up becoming the ultimate leg meta gun. Now you can't buy RIP either because you're not at level 4 traders as well. It's a problem for this gun too. So what you can buy over on Peacekeeper is Hydra Shock, which makes this gun work really quite well. And we may as well just skip over to Peacekeeper straight away, given we're talking about ammo, and I can show you here directly. So 45 Hydra Shock is not quite the same as RIP, but with 100 damage, this makes it a 6-shot kill. You may not think so, but this is to the leg. But the reason why it functions that way is that when you're shooting into a particular leg, you have a 0.7 multiplier on the damage that you do. So I usually like to think about this in terms of effective HPs. You can either do it in the effective HP route, or you can do it in the diminished damage on the actual bullet route, but I just find it easier to use effective HPs. So what happens here is you have 440 health, that's your starting HP down on your PMC, you can see down here, and that you basically remove this HP here, this 65. That takes you to 375 and leaves 35 damage left over. So what I like to do here is, if we're going to continue shooting at that same leg, we'll take 375 and we'll divide it by 0.7, and this allows us to use the normal bullet damages without having to fiddle around, and this gives us 536 effective HP, which we then take this 35 off. So that gets us to 501. Then after this, we need 5 subsequent shots to get us to 1 HP. And then usually there's going to be some bleed damage or something in there that will actually kill them. So if that does happen, then that's going to be 6, because we've got our initial shot here that's got us into this state to begin with. And then we had another 5 shots afterwards. So that's 6 shots. Technically, it could maybe take 7. At that point, it really is, you know, whatever. Now, the one advantage with using leg meta in this particular wipe is very few people are painkillered throughout the particular raid. A lot of people are not bringing in, you know, loads of bottles of water. It's hard to just farm lots of meds. People aren't just running ibuprofens in their pouch because you can't, because you have to keep them on your body. So leg meta is actually a lot more powerful in this wipe than it has been in previous wipes, because people aren't just going to suddenly start running and sprinting and bunny hopping around like startled reindeer as soon as you shoot at them. Because if you take out their leg, they can't walk anymore, and then they've got to suddenly do something with their painkillers rather than just having it on beforehand. So this is actually quite a big advantage. So that's one option if you do want to use leg meta. And the thing about the Vector, we just skip back to it for a second, is because I think it is important to note. This has one of the highest RPMs in the whole game. 1100 RPM is extremely high. It is the second highest alongside the MP9N, and the highest one in the game is the Glock 18C pistol, which is much more uncontrollable than this. You can see 44 recoil. It's different between different guns, so recoil doesn't tell you the full picture, but gives you an idea that it is pretty low recoil, which makes it quite easy to shoot people in the legs if you do wish to do so. So some of the other ammo over on Peacekeeper 3, then we're moving on from the Vector. We'll talk about the M855. Now, M855, again, this is sort of a bit like 555 PS that we talked about before, except this often ends up being kind of the baseline for 556, because it's hard to find M856A1 or M855A1, or the other more exotic ones, M995 and SSAP. It's hard to find those out in the world. And with 31 pen, and we'll go through class 3 helmets, which is fine. And what this does is this allows you to stop creating SOST ammo. Now, you might say to yourself, don't I want to keep making SOST because the pen is 33 rather than 31 of M855, so it's going to be more consistent, and the damage is pretty much the same. And I would argue, well, yes, but also it's a right pain to make SOST, and the only reason why we were doing this in the first place is because we had no way to actually get M855. The next best ammo that we had in the 556 category was much, much worse. So SOST was a lot better. But now that we have the ability just to buy M855 from Peacekeeper, we don't need to go through that rigmarole in the workbench anymore, and you can do something else over there. We do have this bullet here, AP 6.3, which I mentioned for the 9x19 Vector. 52 damage and 30 pen. In the context of this wipe, that's actually not that bad, and given that a lot of the 9mm weapons have very low recoils, this then allows you to penetrate Ratnik helmets that are class 3. You will still struggle with class 4. Historically, I've seen AP 6.3 as rather like a trap bullet. People really get kind of value trapped into it, think, oh, you know, I can use my low recoil to get a headshot kind of thing, and then it just often ends up not working out in practice because you end up hitting arm and then a bit of, you know, neck armor and that kind of thing. But because a lot of the other alternatives from the traders kind of cap out in sort of the 35, 33 kind of pen region, it's actually not as bad. The gap's sort of closed a little bit between AP 6.3 and some of the other comparables. Maybe when we get onto level 4 traders, maybe that won't be the case anymore, but that will probably be true for things like M855 as well. So this is a decent option in some budget SMGs and allows you to get around and make sure that you're getting guaranteed headshots, at least with players who've got class 3 helmets on. At this point, you can now buy the P90. So L191 is a slightly better version of AP 6.3. It's a bit like SOST really, 33 pen. and the damage is about the same. P90 also has super low recoil, so that's quite nice. We'll go and have a look at his weapons directly. You can see you can buy the P90 here. The only issue is it's $1,611, and I just find that quite hard to stomach to pay that cost when there's other weapon systems that are just much cheaper in this particular wipe. And so for me, Peacekeeper tends to be much more about the ammo, and combining that with earlier iterations on level 1 and level 2 traders or things you find in raid, rather than buying stuff from him specifically, because a lot of these guns, the Mark 16 SCAR, the MDR, they're very slow rate of fire. This thing is completely unmodded and it's just going to be really unwieldy. The G36s are kind of horrible in their long barreled iterations, and most of these things just end up being curiosities for the most part. You know, the RSS Sparta is useful for gunsmith, the SR25 is good. I'd probably rather have an SR25. If you're going to pick between the P90 and the SR25, I'd probably pick the SR25, but it sort of depends on what you're trying to do. My favourite, if you want to fire 5.56 and get something from Peacekeeper, my favourite probably is still going back to level 2 trades and getting the G36C. I do think this is really good value. This is $882 when you compare that to something like the AUG with like $1,228. I think the G36C is really good. If you can combine this with a mini monster, if you can get your hand on one of those VHS tapes and get a mini monster on this thing, that performs really nicely. It also has a very close to M4 style fire rate at 750 RPM, if you're not going to go with the regular M4 that is, and it hardly needs modding. You put a foregrip on and a suppressor and an optic, and then you're basically good to go. So let's skip over to mechanic. He really doesn't have that much on him, actually. He's got this JSP, which is probably the most interesting thing, although getting to the MP7 itself is actually not really doable, which is kind of a shame. This sort of sits in the same category as the P90, as you would imagine, so that can be quite tricky, but the MP7 does feel nice to shoot, so I can see why some people use it. There's one over on ref, you can't actually buy an MP7 at this point. You can go the leg meta route with the P90 as well, using this R37F. This is 98 damage, very similar to Hydra Shock. I think I probably still would prefer the Vector, although the P90 does have a much bigger magazine with 50, whereas the Vector is stuck with 30s. So if you like a big mag and you want to be able to spray a bit more, then this could be an option for you. So where mechanic kind of lacks in ammo, I think he makes up for it a little bit in terms of the weapons. Again, some of them are kind of curiosities, but this is typically where I build out my 7.62 guns. I use this, I use his AKMN base. And a lot of the time, you know, you can see I've got a lot of parts collected over here on the right-hand side. A lot of the time, I don't really feel like it's worth buying a full gun from Prapor, only to then change out all the parts and the stock and the handguard and all this stuff. I may as well just buy the lower and go from here. And so I typically tend to do a combination of building things out of what I have in my stash versus what I can buy off the traders to kind of minimize the costs and get something that maybe is slightly better than what I can actually buy right now. So usually I think this is a slightly more cost-effective way of going for it. So I tend to use this AKMN to build it from scratch if I'm using one of these guys. Now, one of the issues with this wipe is that a lot of the barters are kind of tricky. So this used to be really good value, the AK-74M Zenitco, because you get a load of decent parts for it already. The RK3, you get the nice stock and all of that kind of thing. But these days, military cables are kind of hard to find. These are normally quite cheap on the flea market, but finding one yourself is a little bit trickier if you don't play reserve, for example. The Marlboros are easy, but the military cable is not. And so some of these barters are a bit tricky. Now, the one that I would point out is the SA58, and I am yet to use this myself. We did get a load for doing the survey the other day, so you might have some lying around. But this one for 8 weapons parts, I showcased previously how you can basically get weapons parts at 17,500 each, which is using one of the other mechanic lowers, which is this one here on level 2, from the VPO 209. And on this one, you use the Ultimac M1B handguard and use any old pistol grip like the AKM would. That makes it into a functional gun. You can put that into the workbench and that will get you 2 weapons parts out of it. The great thing about that then is that it allows you to create these weapons parts. If you've got spare time in the workbench, you're idling here, you're not making SOS anymore because you've got M855. So now you can start making these. And ultimately that will come out to about 140,000 rubles, which for this gun isn't that bad. I don't think you can even get this 50 rounder at the moment. So you get 50 round drum there. And you got the RVG, which is quite nice. Like it's one of the decent stocks. It's a short version of the FAL, so it will have a bit of recoil, but for close combat, like factory, something like that, this could actually work really, really nicely. Now this works best in combination with ammo that you find over on Jaeger. So I'm going to jump to Jaeger next and look at what he has. There's a little bit more there, but most of it I don't find that useful. Magnum buckshot is pretty good, but the one that we're interested in right now is 7.62 BCP FMJ. Before, we had to make it in the workbench, but now we can buy it from him directly. And this is one of the best bullets that we can buy on the traders at level 3, with 37 pen and 83 damage. This works for a few different weapons. You could buy the SR25 from Peacekeeper, you could do the RFP barter with Skier and get a gun that uses it that way, or you could use this FAL barter that we just looked at and get BCP FMJ there. 83 damage and 37 pen. This is really powerful for this wipe. It's actually genuinely a great option. We'll touch quickly back on Magnum Buckshot. This is super powerful, 400 damage technically per shot. That's kind of the maximum amount because it's 8 pellets and they're 50 each. That does mean that you are allowed to get a headshot out to about 50, 60, 70 meters, something like that. If one pellet hits an enemy in the face, then you can kill them. So it does have the potential, even at long ranges, to kill people, which is quite amazing. And leg meta, this will just kill people in 2 hits. It's very, very clear that if you hit your shots, they will die. There's a few other little options here. Star Slugs for the TOS, and then this one, the makeshift BMGs. Some people like this. I think 26 pen is too low. This means that you're not even going through class 3 with a 50-50. It's more like a 40%. If it does go through, they probably will just die in 1 shot. But against class 4 armors, for example, it's going to take like 3-4 hits before you even stand a chance of getting this through that armor, which is why I don't really like BMGs. Sometimes it feels very, very inconsistent. In terms of guns, he hardly has anything. So he's got Desert Eagles, you can barter these for fuel conditioners, you need these for quests, so I probably wouldn't. The Nerf gun Jaeger, this is quite a hard barter to actually get all the things for, but you do get a thermal from it. The best thing is probably the SV98. This is one of the better bolt actions in a limited hardcore wipe, because it's kind of tricky to get access to really good 7.62x51. Yes, BCP FMJ is fine in a sort of semi-automatic way, 37 pen, but if you're shooting people with a bolty, you really want to make sure that it goes through, and 37 pen won't necessarily go through a TC 2002, for example. And so the SV98 ends up being quite a good choice, because you can combine that with LPS, like we said before. For the SVT, you can make that in the workbench relatively straightforwardly at level 2, and then put it in the SV98, and when you do click somebody on the head, you know they'll die, even if they're wearing a class 4 helmet, which is pretty good. And this version is quite nice as well. It's the sort of olive drab, like polymer version, so it's nice and light compared to the regular one, and it has relatively good ergonomics, 57, which isn't too shabby for what it is. Now, before we conclude, let's go over to Ref. Ref is a little bit more complicated because of the range of things that he has, but obviously the prices of this stuff has gone up quite a bit. Just before this, what I did was I tabulated how much this actually costs, because it's not really that obvious how these kind of stack up against each other, because they're all in different quantities. This one's 120, this one's 50, this one is 30, etc. So what I did very basically was, how many GP coins do you need for 30 rounds of a particular caliber, so we can compare them more easily. And quite obviously, the most expensive one is this, the M80. It's only 20 per pack, and for 90 coins that makes it really quite expensive, as it probably should be, to be honest. Not any other way to get access to M80 right now, and this puts the 7.62 ammos on par with LPS, right? M80 these days has 43 pen, which is significantly better than anything else you can buy, especially against class 4 armors. So there's a reason why this one is very, very expensive. The next in line is 300 Blackout CBJ. So we looked at BCP before, and that one had 30 pen. CBJ has 58 damage and 43 pen. So again, this is really good, especially coming out of an 800 RPM weapon. This is effectively like M855A1 for 5.56. This is a really, really good ammo that you're just not able to access in the game, really in any functional way. You can't even make this stuff right now. And this is the second most expensive. So M80 was 135 GP coins. CBJ is 68 per 30, so it's half the price, still quite a lot, but this is a very, very good ammo. Next, you have SS190. So we looked before L191 on Peacekeeper. This is the better version of that. This is 37 pen. So again, that puts it in a very good category for SMGs, because you can pen through class 4. And with the fire rate and the low recoil, there's a lethal combination. This one is 50 coins per 30. So the third most expensive. SOST, which I probably wouldn't buy. This is a 100 piece. So you get quite a lot in there. And it's only 31 coins per 100. That's kind of like half a day's worth of daily quests or something. And given that you can buy M855 on Peacekeeper and you can make it in the hideout, I don't think this one is really as worth it, but that's probably why it's a bit cheaper. And then you have 545 PP, which is a little bit like SOST, for 26 coins for 30. And then finally this one, which is 9x21 BT, which is one of the better ammos that you can get for the SR2M. Again, this is probably most interesting for the Kappa people doing test drive part 2, so they can put it in their SR2Ms. For everybody else, I don't think it's really worth getting. This one is 17 coins per 30, so it's the cheapest of the selection, but it's also not the best ran in the entire world either. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at all of his weapons before we finish up. Most of these, again, they're a lot of money, so I wouldn't necessarily buy them. They do let you get access to certain parts. So if you need a waffle suppressor or a Valde, you can get that on this AK-74N. If you need to get one of the underbarrels for some reason, you can get that on the AK-12 or up here on the M4. There's also some curiosities for Gunsmith. So this RSAS, I can't remember, I think you maybe just be able to hand this in straight away. So if you just want to complete that Gunsmith with the RSAS rather than doing the Peacekeeper dog tags barter or anything like that, you can just buy the RSAS and just give it to mechanic. So most of these are modded in some way with parts that you just can't get. This one's got like the Zhukov stock on it, for example, which is best in slot. But these are a lot now. They're a lot of money. BSG did push up the price of all the GP coins, which I think is kind of okay, because this is sort of an optional extra. I just don't think that the GP coins should be an infinite resource. You can just buy whatever ammo you like because you've got Arena. I think that's kind of a silly way of going about it. So I think it is better that this stuff actually costs real money now. You have to really think about where you're going to put your GP coins. It doesn't give you an infinite access to this, crazy armory. But if it was up to me, I probably would focus more on the ammo. If I was going to spend GP coins, which I haven't yet, but if I was going to, then I'd probably spend them on some of these ammos, depending on exactly which caliber I wanted to run, and use top loading to the most of the fact that they are quite expensive. So there you have it. In summary, at Prapor, we have 762 PS, which you can combine with the lower base for mechanic to build yourself an AKM-N of a type that suits you. Over on the Skier, we have BCP for 300 Blackout, which allows you to run the MCX in a similar manner like you would an M4. Over on Peacekeeper, you've got M855, which is really just the baseline for running 556 and things like the G36C, alongside AP6.3 to utilize 9mm SMGs in a slightly better way. Mechanic's most interesting one is probably that weapons parts barter for the miniature FAL, which you can combine with BCP FMJ over on Jaeger. And Jaeger's best gun is probably the SV98 combined with LPS from the workbench. Within Ref, you can get access to 2 really powerful ammos, CBJ and M80, which effectively allow you to take 2 calibers of weapon that are sort of subpar and then bring them up to where they need to be based on exactly what it is that you're doing. Probably sniping for the M80 to allow you to consistently go through class 4 helmets, and a little bit of CBJ spiced in there on an MCX build to put it on par with something like an M4 with 55A1 in it, but with a bit more damage. So with that, I'll see you next time when we're at the level 4 traders. As always, a big shout out to all my patrons. As usual, have fun in your raids.